Welcome to this coach learning session. I'm Mark and I'm going to take you through the topic you can see about creating motivating coaching environment. So such an important topic for coaches. Surely our job as coaches is one to do some of the things at the bottom there about keep sessions enjoyable, engaging, inspire people, inspire kids to love the sport, to want to come back next week, to grow a lifelong love for the sport actually and stay in the sport. And just, I suppose, a caveat to that is that, unfortunately, the opposite can be true. So a demotivating coaching environment can mean that kids will and do drop out of sport, unfortunately. So we want to avoid that and promote the former as much as we can. So we're going to start with just looking at, well, what things then involved if we are teaching netball, coaching netball, then what sort of things might be involved in that? And I'm looking at this from a holistic point of view here. So you can see we've got lots of things on there. Well, 6 categories involving a few different things as well. So whether it's social things or more technical, tactical stuff, whether you're trying to teach decision making, whether you're trying to teach psychological skills or develop athleticism, we could add to that list. I think that's probably a good starting point, and that might be one for you to consider around which ones are important for you. Hopefully, you would see value in all of those, but which ones are more valuable potentially for you with the group and the age of the people that you coach, etc. The philosophy of the club, potentially your own philosophy. So all could and should be important, and I think that's a decent exercise to have a think around. Um, like I say, holistic development. But the point here is that actually, when we're talking about the coaching environment, and when I'm talking about the coaching environment, we're not talking about the physical environment. We're talking about the environment that we're all in, the environment that we create as a coach. So what's going on within that whole environment that we're in when we're there in coaching sessions? You can see that the coaching environment encompasses all of this. So it's the starting point, if you like. So it doesn't matter whether you might be the best technical coach in the world, but if we haven't got the coaching environment right, then we might still have those things that have been mentioned around. Kids still might not like it, not come back next week, or drop out of the sport. So the coaching environment is key to any of the above that we're doing. So this brings us then to motivation, and we could go into so many facets of motivation, motivation theory, all that kind of stuff. I see this, I've got this quote, and it's a bit tongue in cheek, but I hear this a lot from coaches, and it's like it's their fault. They don't care. They're lazy. They just won't do it. They're not bothered. Those sort of comments about the kids that we're coaching. Well, I'd just like to flip that. So if that's something that you've said or thought in the past, and I'm sure we all have, by the way. I'm not saying I would never have those thoughts about certain people. Um, I'd just like to flip it though, because well, okay, well, where's our responsibility as the coach there? All right, is it the kids' fault they're seemingly not bothered or not trying their hardest or whatever it might be? Actually, is there some responsibility there with us? So what role have we got as coaches to be motivating? So whether, and that doesn't have to be jazz hands and all that kind of stuff, but how do we create an environment, um, practices, where people feel comfortable enough and confident enough to be motivated and to want to do it and to want to try their hardest and all those sorts of things. So there's a whole lot more to this environment bit, because the being confident and comfortable piece. Is it a safe environment? Are people feeling confident enough to join in? Are there issues going on? Right, even just like how we communicate, or how we non-verbal communication, how those sort of things happen, the power dynamics within the group, all of that, all those social bits play an impact here. So, and apologies if anyone's offended by the F word at the top there. So, but this I think it's a useful study actually. So there was a piece of research done in football, and they basically, when they did something called a youth review, quite a few years ago now, actually, but the youth review in football actually had a great impact on the sport. So things like that you might be aware of, that like now in football at different age groups, for example, there are different formats. So things like 7-a-side and then 9-a-side when you get a little bit older, moving through into 11-a-side only when you're sort of 13, 14. So age specific formats of the game were brought in after this youth review, with the size of goals affected, the size of pitches as well affected, and things like that. But one of the things they wanted to do was to find out the motivations of the kids. So to ask that question, why do you play football? So I think it was a real interesting piece of research that went around the whole country, around different towns and cities in the country, to get a broad mix um, of views, and asked kids those 16 questions, and the task was to pick out their top 9. So those of you who are good at maths will have worked out that 6 therefore don't get picked. So first of all, pick your top 9 and then put those top 9 in rank order. So which one's at the top, which one's ninth, and then obviously there's the 6 that don't get picked. So 40 groups from around the country, real kids, grassroots kids, different types of clubs, so real mix of like decent performance type clubs, real total grassroots, different, playing at different levels in their respective leagues. And so they brought all this together, and found out which were the top answers and which were the low answers. So I'm going to shut up now, and I would recommend that you might want to press pause just for a sec and have a think about and read through the list, and have a think about which ones do you think might have been at the top, which ones you think kids would pick and say, yeah, that's important to me, that's why I play. And again, I think we can remove football from this and just think of your own kids. So replace football with netball, sport, whatever. Why do kids play sport? Why do kids play netball? So which ones might they pick and say, this is why I play netball? Which ones would not have been picked very much by kids? So I'll pause just for a sec. If you want to pause the video now and have a look at that, that might be useful. Okay, so interesting to see whether your reflections marry up with the real answers. So here we have the top answers, and they are in order. So the top answer was number 10. Trying my hardest is more important than winning. Followed by, I love playing because it's fun. It's a really good game and I love it. It keeps me fit and healthy. I like meeting new friends through football, and I like playing with my friends. So you can see that there's sort of there's some similar type answers there, and I think I think it's worth reflecting on the types of answers that we've got there. And I think there's always a few that, when I do this with groups in the room, there's always a couple in there that I think are a bit of a surprise. Like the fit and healthy one sometimes comes up as a surprise to people, that kids kind of think about things like that. But there's one as an example that, fourth most popular actually, and bear in mind that this was done, I think we're going back sort of 10, 15 years ago now. It's probably even more prevalent in this day and age. And the lowest answers, and to put this into context, so I think number 7 and number 3. So it's important to me I win the league and I like to show off my skills. I think we're only picked once. And then winning is more important to me than trying my hardest, and it's important to me I win trophies and medals, were never picked by any of the 40 groups in their top 9. So I think it's really interesting that they were like really rock bottom and across the board, across all of those groups. And again, if we look at those things around winning and showing off and things like that, then we've got some similar answers in there. So again, I think it's a good reflection to think about what types of answers have we got at the top and what types of answers have we got at the bottom. This leads us to different types of motivation, and essentially, if we go back to those top and bottom answers, the top answers, a lot of them were answers that would lead to what we call intrinsic motivation. So I think it's obvious what we're talking about there. Intrinsic is from within you as the person. They're things to do with you and improving yourself for the good of yourself. So those things around wanting to become fit and healthy, about get playing with your friends, and that's something that's intrinsic for you. You get good value for yourself, and there's kind of nothing to show for it, if you like. Um, and again, the trying your hardest, the satisfaction we get from trying our hardest, that comes from within us. That's something that you get yourself from it. And just to show the opposite side of that, so some of those bottom answers around winning a medal as a good example, and I sort of I have a view on trophies and medals. The amount of money that gets spent on trophies and medals in sport generally, I think, is ridiculous compared to the fact that actually kids aren't that bothered about them. When it comes down to it, they might say they like it, but like actually out of that list of 16, it's down there at the bottom. But those more tangible things, I guess, or less tangible, as in the ones that where you're getting praise and all that kind of stuff, are also down there as well. So they're more extrinsic. So this intrinsic motivation is something that leads us to we can see that self-determination theory is a theory of motivation that talks about those three things at the bottom. So autonomy, essentially giving people agency and choice around the things that they do. The mastery or competence, so the things that give us pride in achievement, so how we get pride in things that we can achieve. And relatedness is about like feeling a sense of belonging and feeling a part to something. So I think self-determination theory is a good theory in terms of sport for sure. In if we think about that, we get a level of autonomy. How do we go about it? How can we try to do things better and improve ourselves? Again, linked to that mastery, competence stuff. How do we get our competence? What gives us a sense of self competence? And that obviously directly links to confidence. And then the relatedness bit probably comes from working with others, working with a coach, working with a team, like feeling part of something. So it fits really nicely, and the intrinsic part certainly links massively to that middle one around competence. So that's where we're going to focus our energy for the rest of this. So where do we get our sense of competence from? So I think it's probably worth another pause here and just have a think about, well, either use yourself as your own example, or think about your players, or think of a player that you coach, or players, and think about, well, what gives them that sense of competence? What makes them feel success? Like, yeah, I'm getting somewhere and I've got something out of it. And if we use that the two types of motivation we've talked about there, like, is it the intrinsic factors? Is it working hard? Is it getting better at something for their own good, trying their hardest, all that social stuff, being there with their mates and all that kind of stuff? Or is it this other side of more extrinsic motivation where it might be around the kind of the winning, or that they like to get praise, or they like to be the best? Could be another one, like they like to be the best player, or that others can't do something and I can do it. I can do a new skill and others can't do it. They might be more like extrinsic things. So I think that's worth just again maybe just a little reflection or ponder. This leads us then to looking at goals, and how do the goals that we have. So what goals do the players have? What goals do kids have? And when I say goals, it doesn't have to be I want to be a world champion, or I want to play for the netball Super League team, or whatever. It's not really those types of goals, but what goals do people have in terms of their achievement, their success? What do they want? What are they coming to netball for? What's the point of me coming to training tonight or to the game at the weekend? What do I want to get out of it? And again, that probably, if we flip that and think of from us as a coach point of view, what goals do we have? Or probably more importantly, what goals do you have for the players? Because there's probably a point here in terms of, are you forcing goals onto them, or are we taking into consideration what actually they want to get out of it? And then we're going to look at in the next little bit around, well, what types of goals then could be important here, and certainly the types of goals that we have, and certainly that the players have, can be really, really important for all of this motivation stuff. So we're just going to delve into that a little bit. So a few bits of information here around ego orientation. So the ego orientation, again, is probably obvious what we're talking about there. In terms of ego, like ego orientation from a motivation point of view is around showing that you are better than others, essentially. So you can see some of those top points there to show your ability, and even like to kind of, it probably is a good example of this ego orientation, that I don't even need to try. It's that thing, that where we go, oh yeah, I'm so good that I don't even need to try. It's like, how good am I? Like, that gives you that sense of ego, right? So I'm sure we can all recognize that at some point from people that we coach, or even in ourselves. And again, the other bit here is that it's about comparison. So ego orientation is about, am I better than such and such over there, or such and such over there? Am I the best in this group? Those sorts of comparisons. Well, you might be, but in the grand scheme of things, you might that still might not be very good, kind of thing. So that's just worth bearing in mind when we talk about this sort of stuff. So, but yeah, ego orientation is about, can I show that I'm better than other people? All right, and that's what I get my kicks out of. That's where I get my motivation. Now, unfortunately, ego orientation has a negative impact on some things. I'll just say now, I'll get this in now. Ego orientation isn't all bad, and across the board. So, as an example, if you wanna become an elite player, and if you want to get to the top, you absolutely need ego orientation. You need to want to be better than other people. That the fact that drives you on is going to keep you going to the gym at 6 o'clock in the morning, and doing your stretches at night, and eating the right things, and not drinking, and all those sorts of things that might get you to become an elite player. So ego orientation isn't all bad in all scenarios. What we're talking about here is where I framed the session at the start around, actually across the board at grassroots level, how many players can we keep involved in the sport and get them to love the sport and enjoy coming to the sport, and don't drop out and be still playing netball in 20 years' time? If we've done that, surely we've done our jobs as coaches. So we're talking about it from that point of view. So when I'm talking about these negative bits, it's with that lens on it. So ego orientation views ability as more stable. So actually, the effort involved isn't seen as important, and that means that people give up easily. So the other bit is that I'll withdraw my effort to avoid looking incompetent. So if I'm not good at something, or I just can't do it at this moment in time, I'll not try, because that's gonna make. I would rather do that. I'd rather be seen as not trying than not being able to do it. So it's about the actual ability, and whether I'm capable. So capability and ability at this moment in time, rather than effort. So they don't really focus on the effort that you want to put into it. So it's showboating. It's about showing off, especially if I'm good, or if we're winning. Love that, right? That's going to give me motivation. But that can lead to high anxiety, particularly in competitions or in stressful situations. That can lead to me losing my cool, those sorts of things. I can get upset. I can avoid that competition because I know that we're going to lose, those sorts of things. And then again, I'm that focused on all that stuff. Are we winning? All right. Am I looking good today? Am I the best player on the court? Am I better than this player I'm playing against over there? I can't think about processing feedback from a coach, as for an example, that might help my performance because I'm focusing on all this other stuff. And it can actually lead to some of these like dysfunctional behaviors like cheating. And unfortunately, the bit that I talked about, the important bit, the bottom point around dropout. So high ego orientation. So research tells us that kids who drop out, they're more likely to have a high ego orientation. I said high ego orientation because it's not just let's get away from it. It's not We're not just typing people. We're not saying oh they're an ego person and they're a task person. As with a lot of psychological stuff, it's a continuum. We'll all have some ego and we'll all have some mastery orientation as well. Just some people will be higher in one and or others will be higher in the other. So a couple of things on this. Like you said, that actually both can be useful at times, but if we're talking about coaching kids and young people at a grassroots level to keep them involved in a sport, then too much ego orientation, not necessarily any, like a little bit can be good, but too much ego orientation at the expense of mastery orientation can be bad. But the second point here is, and this is like the good news, which I'll tell you now before we get into this bit, and we'll touch on later, is we can do something about it. So your ego or mastery orientation isn't fixed, and in fact, it's research shows that coaches can set a coaching environment to be more ego or more mastery orientated, and that the players who are in that environment are more likely to take on those characteristics. So if I create an environment that's more around this stuff on this page around mastery orientation, my players are more likely to have mastery orientated goals and therefore have some of these behaviors which are seen as more positive and not be as ego orientated as they might be if I presented that kind of an environment. So this is the good stuff. So mastery orientation, it's about judging yourself against yourself. Personal standards. Can I improve? Can I get better? How can I do that? Be self-reflective about your effort. So the effort is seen as a good thing. Like if I've tried my hardest today, I get motivation from that. That's like I actually take something from that, or the personal development that I've got from those improvements in my effort levels, how hard I tried, all those sorts of things. Um, and and that leads to me thinking that I can improve through increased effort. That it's not just about my capability or ability at this moment in time, but that actually that kind of we could link into something else here with like a growth mindset of that I can improve if I try my hardest. All right, and that's probably in a long term thing. There's some Another part is that um, they would be less anxious, but also can cope with any anxiety because they they can do things like work harder, seek social support from their peers, all that sort of stuff, and they would happily seek that feedback that we were talking about before from a coach. So they would want that. They'd want it to because they see improvement as a good thing. So I mentioned that we can do something about this, and we can create either. So coaches will have an environment that is more ego orientated or is more mastery orientated, or it could be a mixture of both, and we might be doing certain things at certain times. And again, that's something to consider. What do you want to do? This acronym of target is a way that we can make our environment more of a mastery coaching environment, which is again seen to promote all of those good behaviors that we've just talked about. You can see that we've got things like looking at the types of tasks that we do, um, autonomy that we give, that we've mentioned already, the recognition that we give to people in terms of praise and things like that, how we group people up, how we get the players to evaluate their own performance, and the timing of mainly tasks as well. So we're going to look at these in a little bit more detail. So the tasks, and like I said there, I think the timing kind of comes into that as well. So if we look at the types of tasks that we give in terms of practices and things, so can you think about giving more individual tasks? So even if that's in a team practice or group practice, it could be, it could still even be a full court game, but we could give individual tasks to individual players. So we can give them, I've called it there, give them an assignment, all right, something to try. I think that's the bottom point around giving a goal for people to, can you try to play a 1-2 before you get on the circle edge? Can you try to do a shooters to shoot a ball, or things like that for individual players according to their position? The other bit we can do is to adapt practices. So you can see that we might have different size spaces as to where it could be, and or whereabouts it might be on the court. So it might be a court specific area. We could give position specific tasks, as I've kind of given an example of already. And again, we could have like different things to do with different types of, or the numbers of attackers and defenders. So it might be that I purposely want more attackers than defenders. It could be that I want my defenders to kind of just go 50% in terms of how much pressure that we're putting on at this phase. That kind of gives some different individual goals from that. And linked to all of that, so the timing of those tasks, I think it's sometimes useful to think about making that flexible, so we can have, so people who kind of need to catch up, who are struggling at the moment, have a bit more time, while those who need pushing on, we push them on. All right, so again, this might come down to the tasks that you're doing and how you're setting them up, but if it's more group tasks here, then one group could move on and this group over here could kind of just keep going with what you just keep going with that, what you've been doing there. You need more practice. Autonomy, which we mentioned before, to do with self-determination theory. So this is essentially giving choice. So can you give players some choice in terms of how they are learning within the session? So giving some responsibility, giving some leadership responsibilities, things like that. And some examples of things that they could choose. And I think this almost goes on a bit of a sliding scale. So like from the top, like they could actually design practices themselves, or tasks to do, or sessions if you're going to be really wild. And that could be from, you could give them options there. And obviously, I think obvious with that is that might be either older or more experienced players, or people who know what they're talking about, or once you've had that group for a number of years and you trust them. And so I think there's a caveat with that, but like that will be kind of given a lot of autonomy. As we work our way down, there's less. Again, like, do you let them do their own warm-up as an example? Is that a good way to get to that next level, if you like? How to progress the practice. I think this is a real easy one that you can use, and probably a favourite of mine is the second part of that is to, can they, if as we stop, we do the practice for a bit, 5 minutes, right, okay, let's consider these things from the coach potentially, but then the players get a chance to add or change a rule. So give us a rule change, and it might be that they need to suggest it to you, and you say yes or no, and that you could still say no, we're not doing that. But they can suggest changes to the game or the area or the rules or whatever it might be, or they could just give ideas. Right, how do we progress this then? If we link that back to the task that we just talked about, if we've got different groups going on, I think that's probably easier. So again, like, right, how are you lot going to this is too easy for you lot. What are you going to do? How are you going to make that harder? All right. Are you struggling here? All right. Well, how can we make it easy for ourselves? So they might even come up with some of those adaptations to the practices. They could just choose which groups that they work in, or the number of groups, or the number of people in a group, or who they want to work with, those sorts of things. Again, I think like easy wins are things like, I think we're sometimes too fixed in coaching, and it's got to be right. Everyone's got to be in twos, right? This practice we're doing in fours. If we haven't got fours, then that like creates a massive problem. Wow, let's have one sitting out or something. But why not have? Does it matter if it's twos or threes as an example, or threes or fours, right? So it can be threes, get into threes or fours, sort it out yourselves. That's given that autonomy to them on a smaller level, that kind of introduces this and gives them that responsibility. And again, probably like even less than that, it could be that you just get them to put this stuff out, the equipment out, or create their own area. So off you go, right? You need a box, you need an area. It's got to be a certain size, but off you go. You go and decide where you want to work. Put it out yourselves. Go and sort that out. You need a ball and 4 cones. Sort it out. That sort of idea. The recognition one, I think, is really important in terms of what we talked about. And so we talked about praising effort, and again, that gets into some of that growth mindset stuff a little bit. But so effort more important than ability. So can we praise those things first of all? But I think that probably one of the biggest things I took from all of this research is some of this around private praise. So I think we're guilty of this as coaches, that it's everything's whole group. We say stuff in front of the whole group. We've got to get the whole group in all the time, and we've got to speak to the whole group, and we'll pick people out and give them praise in front of everyone. Now, all that's doing, if we think back to that ego orientation, that is just absolutely giving that kid that ego praise. All right, in terms of, don't I look good in front of the whole group? Isn't this brilliant? Because I've been singled out by the coach. All right, I look good. I'm the best in this group because I've just been told that. So it gives that whole comparison thing that we kind of want to avoid. So can we give praise in private instead? All right, so a quiet word with someone, again, that gives it for them. So that's the opposite. That's that intrinsic, that mastery stuff in terms of their motivation around. That's for them. It's for them themselves, that intrinsic within the person motivation that it gives them. So having the quiet words, yes. So still tell them that was brilliant what they just did. Just give the quiet thumbs up, or the word in the ear as you walk past, or the natural break there. So as at the end of a practice, or whatever, just who you're going to go. Just make sure you walk past them and say, that was brilliant, by the way, when you did that. Okay, and just do it that way. And again, their own evaluation. So getting the players to evaluate their own performance. So can we encourage this? Can we get them to do that themselves? Can we get them to do that based on their efforts and improvements? So what things are you trying to improve tonight in this session? So we're working on this stuff. We're working on centre passes. What are you going to try and improve tonight to do with centre passes? Jot that down, or you don't have to jot it down. Have a think about it. But think about yourself, and then can we come back to that? So it breaks in after practices or halfway through, or we come back to it at the end, and not just you've got 30 seconds to reflect on it, like we tend to do sometimes. Just like give them some time to actually consider, have they improved, or have you improved since last session? What have you been doing during the week? All those sorts of things. Groups, I think, is an interesting one, and I think there's pros and cons to different approaches here, actually. But the research around the mastery environment stuff is that mixed ability groups are better to avoid that labeling of, again, the comparison stuff of they're the best and we're the worst over here. I know I'm in this group because I'm the worst player. Oh, I know I'm in this group because I'm the best player. I don't even have to try anymore. Type of approach. So that mixed ability of people trying to challenge each other, using the better players to bring the other ones on. Again, we can use the strategic matchups that's mentioned there around who do I put against who to try and challenge the better players potentially. So I can do it that way. And again, just like a different approach, I suppose, because a lot of what we do is competitive tasks, but we can also do cooperative tasks, and that means around can we help each other rather than try to beat each other. So sometimes it's about as a whole group, or I suppose in different groups, but is there something about can we do this as a group where we're all trying to be better and help each other actually, rather than beat them over there. All right, so there's different ways that we can do that. Having something where you can, I suppose, where you can count it and like have a record. Like we've got a record of, we got 30 last week. Let's see if we can get 35 this week on some, on that type of an idea of a task. And again, I think it's just something like a quick win for us as coaches is we all do it. It's like, right, who, if it's an individual task, who got the most, or who was the best, who dropped it the most, or those I saw you drop it. So it's all those sorts of things. If we can avoid that, again, that's leading to those ego behaviours. So my last point, just bringing it back to this, I suppose, and just using this as a reference, that just remember that no matter what we're doing, this coaching environment is being created all the time by all your behaviours, all your interactions, how you set up. Just think about, how do people feel in this environment here when we're all here? How do they feel amongst each other? How do they feel with me? How do they feel with all the other coaches? How do they just feel generally? And are they comfortable? Are they confident? All right. And can we create that environment to be more of this mastery approach where we foster these positive behaviours to keep people involved in the sport? And just like referencing that, my very last point is that if we think of success, it's not always what you see, and we don't always see it. So I think there's, we can judge success on winning leagues or whatever it might be, or getting, how many players you get into a Super League team, whatever it might be. But like, actually, some of those things I mentioned around, well, do kids love it, and do they want to come back, and are they still playing in 20 years' time when you see them in the supermarket, and all of those sorts of things. Are they enjoying netball? Do they love netball? Do they want to keep involved in the sport? So some of those things that I think we can do from some of the stuff we've talked about tonight, we might not see, but again, you should take great pride in having achieved some of that. Hope that's been of use. Any reflections at all? I'm always open to further discussion. So that's absolutely fine if anyone wants to get in touch or chat further or look into this stuff further. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the session.